Okay, so we're coming to the last. This is the second to last session, hopefully, on this series of Jacob. So we're coming to the end of the experience of the wrestling. So if we turn to Patriarchs and Prophets 208.2, Emma, if you're in the document, can you just read the first bit? What's there?
Just a quote.
Yeah.
Okay. Esau had despised the blessings of the covenant. He had valued temporal above spiritual good, and he had received that which he desired. It was by his own deliberate choice that he was separated from the people of God. Jacob had chosen the inheritance of faith.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about Esau for a minute, because in the previous sessions we was asking the question, how would God have worked out, Jacob getting the blessing? How would God what should Jacob, what should he have done? He was asking that question. Was it right for him to kind of work in his own strength, or participate in trying to get his birthright himself, or just to wait on God? Because it appeared, Isaac was 100 years old when he decided to bestow the blessing upon Esau. So it appears like it was a long, long wait. So let's just look into, we can actually probably work out how God would have done it, what it may have looked like, just by kind of looking at Esau and his decisions. So okay. So let's put Esau here. You see it, yeah? Let's put Esau. And let's put Jacob here. And let's put their views towards the blessing. Yeah. Oh. Can I put their view towards the birthright?
View of the birthright, yeah.
We put view of the birthright. Yeah. So what's the first? What does anyone first say about Esau? What do we know? It says
from this paragraph.
Yeah, from the first sentence.
He despised the blessings of the covenant.
So he despised the blessing of the covenant. So the despised. Could it be like to regard something as unworthy, or unworthy of notice or consideration, or to feel like a strong dislike?
Yeah, it's very strong. Contempt for it, hatred.
Hatred, yeah.
So let me put
look down upon, scorn, dislike, yeah.
So the birthright is broad. There's a spiritual side and there's a physical side to it. So we've got to work out, okay, what is it that Esau is like looking at or despising? So we'll get to that later on. So it says he despised the blessings of the birthright, yeah, or of the covenant. Yeah, let me put covenant. So the covenant's more specific now. The covenant's like a relationship between you and God, yeah.
So is that like an agreement?
Yeah. So he despised that. Yeah. And then it says he valued temporal above the spiritual. So what he valued. So what's his value? What does he value?
Temporal.
We know where his values are. Values. Temporal. Over spiritual. So let's just work with this, what we've got so far. Isaac, yeah? He wants to give Esau the birthright, his favorite child. So we gathered that from the previous 21 sessions. He wants to give a child the birthright, the child who is in this condition. He wants to give a child something that sees this thing that he wants to give him as unworthy. He looks down on. He doesn't value the spiritual side of it, but he values the temporal. He values the temporal above the spiritual. Yeah. And this is a child that is giving it to him. So he's got two children. You compare and contrast. And he focuses on the child who doesn't value this, but still he wants to, he goes all out to do it in secret to give him this. So I'm saying Esau was kind of physically getting blind, but I think he was spiritually blind, and his walk was walked with God. That's kind of the conclusion. Or he's not walking with God. So that's my conclusion. To make this decision, if you're walking with God and your eyes are open, you wouldn't make this decision. And I'm thinking, would God make this decision? So I'm saying, so far what we've got here, we can see why Esau would be bypassed. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and it says, and he had received that which he desired. He received what he desired. Was it that? What was it? The temporal?
Must be, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because after the birthright, he got some sort of blessing.
Physical goods.
Physical. So what he desired, he received. This is not what he desired, but the temporal good is what he desired. This is a repeating enlarge. The temporal. He valued the temporal above the spiritual. So he received what he desired, which was the temporal. So let me put temporal. The goods that will just melt away, fade away, be destroyed. You know, it was by his own deliberate choice that he was separated from the people of God. So now I'm going to put chose to be separated from the. So let me ask a question. So, if God was going to give him his birthright, this man is seeing it as unworthy, undesirable, rather the temporal over the spiritual. And then the covenant is about bringing people together, connecting you and God together. So also connecting people together. It's choosing to be separate. So this is the people of God. He's choosing to be separate from the people of God. So this is his choice, this is his desire. And Esau wants to give him this. This is the birthright. Esau wants to give him this. in where he's separated from the people of God. What good is a birthright when he's make this decision? What can you do? He's not going to do nothing with the spiritual side of this birthright. So I'm saying, is there more to the? I'm saying things would have to manifest for then God to kind of bypass Esau and then go to Jacob. But Jacob had to wait for that manifestation. Sadly, he didn't. He took it upon himself to go all out and do it in his own time and in his own way. So sometimes waiting for a manifestation to occur can be painstaking. It can take time.
That's waiting.
It may test your faith. Waiting in God's time, but sometimes we have to wait for manifestations to happen. For Jacob, Isaac's eyes to be opened, and for him to realize that Esau is not the one. For Esau's actions to manifest, for Esau to Isaac to realize, okay, now I see I made a bad decision. You've caused me more anxiety, you've caused me more stress, more whatever. Because when he went and married some Canaanite wives, it caused anxiety in his parents. I'm saying this decision would have caused more anxiety and regret. And then I think God probably would have bypassed him and give it to Jacob. And I don't know, that's just my little conclusion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so let's continue. So I'm saying Isaac probably didn't really know his child because he's blinded by the things what he loves about him. But deep down, maybe he didn't really know him that well. If he did, maybe he wouldn't have made those decisions to give him the birthright. Yeah. So it says Jacob had chosen the inheritance of faith. So Jacob chosen did it say inheritance of faith or by faith?
Jacob had chosen the inheritance of faith.
Yeah. So two different choices. One's choosing what God wants, and one's not. So now we've got two children, but one's a younger, one's an elder. Normally it goes to the elder, but the elder is not functioning properly. The elderly is kind of working kind of dysfunctional. And it just won't work with the elderly. So it's by logic, it should go to the younger. So Esau had taken 2 wives of the idolatrous Canaanites. This was a source of deep sorrow to Isaac and Rebekah, for they well knew that God had commanded their fathers not to intermarry with idolaters, and they had fully understood the care and anxiety of Abraham that Isaac should marry a wife of his own nation and faith. So, what does it say about Abraham? It says, he knew, he's looking back. It says he knew the care and anxiety of Abraham in making Isaac marry somebody of the same faith. So he had that care. So Abraham had that care to make sure that his son married someone of the same faith, because he knows the consequences, the cause and effect. He knew the cause and effect of marrying a wrong woman from the wrong faith, that what it will cause, what it may introduce, what the corruption he may bring upon Isaac. Yeah. And he knew his child was a godly child. Isaac was a godly child, willing to kind of sacrifice himself like a type of Christ on the altar. When Abraham was about to get the knife and pull it right through him, he was brave enough to go through that experience and sacrifice himself. So he knew his child was a godly child. Now contrast that now to Esau. Esau's not making any sacrifice. He's not doing none of that by faith. He'll probably fight his dad off, maybe. But but now compare and contrast young Isaac to elderly Isaac. It seems like it's two different people, because it seems like Isaac does not have that care like his dad had. If he had that care, he will realize this son is not functioning right. It appears like a child not of the faith, so I can't give somebody who's not of the faith the birthright blessings, because he's not choosing the faith. He's choosing to be separated. But I have this child who is totally opposite. Opposite child, personality, character, and everything. You know, so it seems like it's kind of different to his dad. In his older age, he's not functioning with that same kind of care and attention like Abraham. And this lack of care and attention makes you make bad decisions. When you don't pay much attention to what's going on within your household or your own two children, because it's favoritized this child. So maybe it's not seeing the qualities in this child. It could be that. So I'm saying lack of care and attention to yourself, to the people around you, your loved ones, it can be detrimental. Sadly, this favoritism had a bad impact on Jacob. It led Jacob to make bad decisions, bad choices, develop bad behavior. Yeah.
When you say lack of care amongst the children, is it in the discipline? Is it in the correction?
No, I'm talking about in this context.
Yeah, in what yeah, so can you explain?
So Jacob, Isaac, so Abraham, yeah, so I was comparing Abraham and Isaac. When Isaac was a child, Abraham had special care and attention to the person Isaac marries. There had to be somebody of the faith. It's a must. No ifs, no buts, no maybe. It's a must. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so this is when they're a lot older.
No, so let's go back to Abraham and Isaac's a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Abraham had that care and attention as a father to the son. Yeah, this care and attention, making sure is with the right person in the right place. It's a kind of type of Jesus and the Father. Yeah. Now let's compare that. So there's something about the faith, preserving the faith, not making it polluted or diluted or whatever. Jacob prevented that. So it made him marry somebody of the same faith. Rebecca. And that sadly, we know what Rebecca started to do later on with her two boys. But so let's compare that now with Esau, Isaac as a father, as an older now as a father. Yeah. Let me put it on the board. Abraham. Cared who so I'm going to put this care, because we know Isaac cared who Esau married. So let's not compare and contrast that. But I'm putting this care and attention to the
preservation of the faith. Yeah.
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 Preservation. Yeah. So the preservation of the faith. So he understood that his child was of the faith. He understood that, yeah.
Right.
So that means he can. Is confident to send him to somewhere else to get a woman who's of the same faith. So that was his care and attention.
He wants to keep him in the faith by getting him to marry someone of his own family. Yeah.
But he knows that he's in the faith anyway, because he's just willing to sacrifice himself. Isaac is, he knows his child is walking with God. So he knows that. And now let's look at Isaac. Does he know that his child he's not walking with God? Does he know that he rather desired to be separated from the people of God? Does he know that?
Does Isaac know that Esau
Yeah,
is not walking with God?
yeah.
I think when he got married, yeah, he must have known beforehand.
So
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
if he knows, why is he making these choices to give him the birthright?
I think his love of Esau surpassed that.
So he's saying his love made him have lack of care and attention to.
Or maybe discipline when he was younger or something. There must have been a difference, I mean, in the way they were brought up.
So what I'm saying is, he had lack of care and attention to his child. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, yes.
Lack of care and attention to the handling of the covenant.
Or that he loved him and that love overrode his care and attention. So he knows Esau is rebelling against it. He knows that there's a quote here I wanted to share actually from Patriarchs and Prophets 179, which is backing up this point. She just says it in a slightly different way. She says that Esau was subject to mere outward and earthly attractions. Esau took 2 wives of the daughters of Heth. They were worshippers of false gods, and their idolatry was a bitter grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So he knew that he was marrying idolatrous women, and that grieved them. So they knew the importance of it. And then it clarifies, Esau had violated one of the conditions of the covenant, which forbade intermarriage between the chosen people and the heathen. Yet Isaac was still unshaken in his determination to bestow upon him the birthright. And then it clarifies the reasoning of Rebekah, Jacob's strong desire for the blessing, and Esau's indifference to its obligations had no effect to change the father's purpose. So he knew that Esau was indifferent and that he'd married against the covenant. And even though Rebekah's reasoning with him, and he knows Jacob really wants the birthright, he knows all that, and he still wants to give it to Esau. So it seems it's the affection for Esau that overrides or excuses this behavior. Maybe at the back of his head he's thinking, well, if I give him the blessing, he might change, it might help him. We excuse and justify wrong behavior as a parent because we hope that one day there's going to be a change. It kind of like overrides everything. This kind of love that we have, it's blind to the faults. Even though he saw the faults, he still went ahead anyway. So it's quite.
So he's saying this love and affection overrided that attention, that this important decision, the will of God.
Yeah. And I think, I suppose you could say it's idolatry. He's putting Esau before God, isn't he, really? He becomes an idol.
So it's kind of opposite to Abraham.
Yeah, it's kind of, Abraham put the care in. I think
he's walking with the will of God.
But, yeah.
And he understands his child.
But his child is choosing to walk with the will of God. And at this point, Isaac doesn't seem to be choosing to walk with the will of God.
He's not. And his child isn't.
And his child isn't either, no.
So
but he sees the importance of it. He sees that he wants him to marry somebody who's of the faith.
So this is why the will of God is telling him to give it to Jacob. Because God sees, what does God see what Isaac doesn't see? Maybe. This child is not going to run with his covenant.
No.
This is why God says this is for Jacob.
But he's got no good reason to give it to Esau except he likes him. It's the only reason. So
with that, he's not caring. He's not handling this correctly with good care. He's not handling God's will. He's not handling God's things. What is God's covenant? He's
not valuing the covenant like Esau isn't.
Really, by his decisions. So I'm saying this lack of care can be detrimental. Yeah. So even self-care, what is this telling me, God? Okay, you've said this for Jacob, but I feel I want to give it to him. So what is this telling me? Lack of reviewing, lack of reflection. What do I need to learn from this? What do I need to learn from my child?
And his lack of valuing it is going to rub off on Esau. So it's going to make the problem even worse because Esau doesn't value it anyway. And now Isaac's kind of playing along with not valuing it by allowing him to marry the heathen wives, by then still wanting to give him the blessing. And it's like, well, what does that say to Esau about how Isaac values the covenant? If Esau can behave how he wants in rebellion and Isaac still wants to give it to him, it's like, well, how does dad value it then? You know,
But it's putting
conscious thoughts. Go on.
it's almost like putting his word above God's word. Esau.
Yeah.
So, okay then. So he's got some direction from God, but he's not managing that direction too well. It's like there's no care, there's no anxiety happening with giving him the birthright. You know how we see the anxiety of Abraham of making sure his child marries someone of the same faith. It's like a different mindset that we see between the two, between Isaac and Abraham. And yeah, anyway. So, okay then. It says, the next, we read on in the quote, it says, Isaac was now more than 100 years old. The infirmities of old age were upon him, and his sight had grown dim. Esau was still his favorite son, notwithstanding Isaac had been made acquainted with the purpose of God. So he's been acquainted. He determined to bestow the benediction upon his firstborn, but he's been acquainted with the purpose of God. So that word acquainted, what does that mean? Familiar.
Made known, yeah.
It's familiar with the purpose. This is what I'm saying. If you know the purpose of God and you do something contrary, that means you're not walking in the will of God. You're not walking with God. And then this is the outcome. So you got to question yourself, what is the purpose of God concerning me and my decisions? You know, and I think this relationship between him and his son interfered with that. And this type of relationship, what they had, interfered with Isaac fully walking with God and following God's directions. So I think sometimes you've got to check your relationships with people. It may have an influence on you in your walk with God. But anyway, so what does God do with this? So with all this, what does God do? And the answer is, my answer is, Esau got bypassed. But let's read the next quote, Signs of the Times.
1879.
Yeah, paragraph 3.
Rebecca had been divinely instructed that Jacob was to be in the direct line through which the promise would be fulfilled in the birth of the Redeemer. She was confident that her husband was going contrary to the will of God, and that no reasoning could change his purpose. And without due reflection, she determined not to allow the father's partiality for his eldest son to avert the purpose of God.
Yeah, so Emma, what's the answer in the summary?
And the question was,
what does God do with all this, with this situation, with this rebellion?
Nothing. Sorry.
Nothing. It bypasses Esau.
Bypasses Esau.
And he gives it to Jacob.
Well, through
so Isaac is giving it to Esau, and God's saying God's purpose is to give it to Jacob. Well, why is God giving it to Esau, Jacob? Because Esau's not walking with God.
Yeah. But God hasn't chosen to give it really at this point.
No.
He's forced to give it.
Well, the answer's there.
What's he doing? What's he done? I think he hasn't done anything.
He's given them, they know it's for Jacob.
Yeah.
So it's all God's work.
Yeah. He's told them he wants to go to.
Will they interfere with the work of God? Yeah. So Rebecca knows, she's confident that Isaac's going contrary to the will of God, and that no reasoning, no Bible study, no what type of reasoning she did. She said, listen, God's telling us this. It's not working. Sometimes, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes when you tell people, it's what I'm saying, sometimes you can tell people something and they don't listen. You can tell them for 20 years, you've got this issue, or this is going on, this is what I see. You can have like 20 witnesses telling you the same thing, that this issue is a problem and you need to work on it. And you can fight it. You can just close your ears, close your eyes, and say, you're all wrong. You don't know me. Don't tell me about myself. This is what I'm saying. Sometimes things have to manifest in your life. Maybe chaos, a disruption, for you to open up your eyes, open up your ears, and take in an experience that everybody's been telling you, and see it for yourself, experience it for yourself. Sometimes you have to go through experience to realize the error of your ways, or you miss it, whatever it may be. And Isaac, had to go through an experience to realize he's made a bad decision, or he was making a bad decision for all these years, because reasoning wouldn't work. You know, God told them this is what Isaac, so that's all he needed, this telling. That was God's first plan. Okay, I tell you this, just listen, just follow. But sometimes we can't hear God. Sometimes the words of God is just not enough. We don't want to hear, so we need an experience. We may need an enemy coming in the night like Jacob. we may need breaking. It's so harsh, but it's the reality of things.
So then, even if when Jacob knew that, he still continued in his way.
In deceiving.
Yeah. Well, in lots of ways. I mean, if he wasn't supposed to get married to more than one wife, he got married to 3 more.
I don't know. With that, I don't know. But in this context, Jacob knew the birthright was for him, didn't he?
Yes.
His mom did tell him.
Yes.
So he knew. So let's work with this because it's more easier, more simpler. He knew. Yeah. But there's things that he doesn't know. Well, there's things that he doesn't understand about God. So that lack of understanding caused him to behave the wrong way.
Even though he had chosen the inheritance of faith.
Yes. And his mom, maybe she had a lack of understanding, you know, of the level of trust, but understanding was not where it should be, maybe.
And part of that, I think, is because she's in headship model and Isaac's level of trust is not there. So she's overridden by Isaac often.
Yeah, so Isaac's in charge. So he's got the power.
Their view of God has been a bit warped, distorted.
Yeah.
But look how merciful God is, because he said he had still permitted his sin to work out its correction.
Yeah.
For Isaac.
No, for Jacob.
For Jacob, yeah.
Yeah. But do we want that?
But even Isaac.
Do we want that experience? The experience that we want is God. That God doesn't have to do that. We could just listen and do what God says.
Yeah, he could have done. But he had a choice.
And us receiving the consequences, and God has to work out the correction through the consequences, through pain, through bitterness, anxiety, and grief. That's how God worked it out, sadly. And that's the experience that we don't want. But sadly, we have to have it because our ears are too hard. You know, if we are Jacob.
But if we're Isaac, I just don't know how Isaac got to that stage when God is working with Isaac all the way along saying, look, your wife's telling you, I've told you the birthrights to go to Jacob. Your wife's telling you, and now Esau's gone out, and you can see Esau doesn't value these things. You know that. He's gone out now and married wives in front of you, 2 wives. Or wasn't
it wives after the birthright?
Well, this quote said, no, he went and married the wives, and Isaac was still set on giving him the birthright. That's what Petrus said. That's why I read that one.
Oh.
Because I thought that makes it clear he married the wives before Isaac gives it to him. Because he's violated the covenant by marrying these wives, yet Isaac was still unshaken in his determination to bestow upon him the birthright.
Well, maybe it changed when Esau was born and he started to do all these things, and Isaac started to I don't know, maybe that experience changed him.
Or maybe even, remember with Isaac's mother, what was her name? Rachel.
Rachel, yeah.
That she allowed Abram to marry Hagar, to go into Hagar. And Isaac wasn't the firstborn. So I don't know, maybe all those things affected him too in some way.
Yeah, it must have damage from that past. I don't know, maybe he's got some Yeah, it's just he just seems to have no good reason to give it to Esau except he likes him.
So it must have changed his experience.
Going against God. Yeah.
I mean, probably Esau changed his experience, you know, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe he's also sorry, I was just thinking maybe he's also carrying guilt over Ishmael because they've had that bad dynamic. Ishmael's the firstborn, should have really got the blessing. Maybe there's something in that. Because
it could be.
he's bypassed the blessing and Isaac gets it. And Isaac's thinking, well, you know what? Ishmael was born first. That was, all that was a bit, dodgy is not a good word, but it was all a bit, it wasn't the right way it should have been done. He shouldn't have been there, Ishmael. He should have never had him in the first place. He gets a blessing as well. And that it seems like a repeat pattern. He gets a blessing, but Isaac gets the real one. And now he's looking like, why do you want me to give it to my secondborn when really it should go to the firstborn? So maybe there's some inheritance there.
Maybe there's no reason to give it to the second one because it's done correctly. We've had 2 children for the same woman.
Yeah.
I haven't had a different wife. I'm not copying Abraham and getting Hagar.
Yeah.
So what's the reason? There's no reason.
No.
So probably
and that's the way God said it to be done. Yeah.
And probably he loves him so much.
Yeah.
He likes what he does. So all this probably added onto the reasons why he made this decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see how your mind can really get a bit.
And if you look at it a prophetic sense, or not even proper prophetic, but it's a dispensational thing. He's stuck in, God has already said go to the firstborn, and he's not willing to change now. He's not willing, even though he knows God's changed his viewpoint in this generation. He's saying, I want you to give it to the secondborn. He's saying, well, that goes against what you've already said. I'm not shifting my position. He's stuck in the old ways of thinking. He's refusing to move, even though he knows God's saying something different.
Probably the older it gets, it's harder.
Yeah.
The older you get, the more your mind gets more plugged.
So generational sins do affect children if it's not being sorted out.
Generational sins, but I'm guessing only because the person holds on to it. So Isaac holds on to this wrong viewpoint, and he holds on to his favoritism of Esau all through his life. So he keeps making wrong choices. So it's only because he perpetuates the sin in his own actions. He allows that to affect him. So I don't think it's like some curse put on him because of the generation before, in that sense. When you say generational sins, because sometimes when people use that, they say, oh, you're affected. It's a kind of supernatural thing that you're cursed because your father was like this, you're the same way. But you're only the same way because you made those choices.
Exactly, because you choose to. So when he did not choose to do things God's way, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Same thing probably his father didn't do.
Yeah.
Happened.
Okay. So let's read this next quote. Well, let's continue with the quote that we read. So PP 208.2. So it says Esau had despised the blessings of the covenant. He had valued temporal over spiritual good and had perceived that which he desired. It was his own deliberate choice that he was separated from the people of God. Jacob had chosen the inheritance of faith. He had endeavored to obtain it by craft, treachery, and falsehood, but God had permitted his sin to work out its correction. So he endeavored to obtain it by craft. Craft is skill in deceiving others, deceiving people that are nice, guile. Treachery, you can say it's like betrayal of trust. It's a deceptive action or nature. Falsehood is like a lie, a state of being untrue. It's a lie. So this is how she's describing Jacob's actions. Yeah, craft, treachery, and falsehood. And then she said God permitted his sin to work out. His sin of these things, these craft, treachery, and falsehood, these lies, these deceptive behaviors, to work out its correct. So his deceptive behavior, God worked out its correction. And this is how he deals with us and the damage that we may do to people, to ourselves. the damage of relationships, whatever type of damage that we have done in the past, or continue or doing right now in the present, shall I say. God works out in his own way, own time. God tries to work out that correction, whatever that may look like, our baggage, our issues, things have to work out its correction. And the correction involved Jacob learning about his mistakes. He learned about himself in his correction. He learned about himself. He learned about God through grief and anxiety, through pain, whatever it may be. It worked out its correction. In the end, it probably took 20 years, it may take 10 years, 5 years. God knows best, So I think that's
absolutely. And I think like even just what we were talking about is, those mindsets that are passed down to us. It's even things like, so I'll give a personal story. So my mum was telling me that when I was born, that my dad was like, oh, it's not a boy. And my granddad was like, you should never speak over a child like that, because we have this cultural thing where we think that, it's only the boys that carry through the, bloodline. It's only boys that, do wonderful things and can sustain the family. And my mum was telling me that my granddad said, you never know, it might even be a girl that is the one to save the family when the time comes. And so I didn't know that these were the kind of thoughts, the culture, kind of like the cultural views, like we kind of see in this story, that surrounded my birth. I'm the eldest and I'm the daughter, but because of that, I was not despised, but I definitely wasn't what my dad had hoped for. And then after me was born my brother, and it was like, yay for him. And I definitely grew up knowing that feeling of my brother is definitely preferred over me. It was that very, it was just very, very clear. And I know my parents, loved me, and my dad loved me, but it was clear that my son was like the, hallelujah child. And it's really interesting because of all of the things that dad has gone through, it's his daughter that was the one of everyone that, my brother doesn't want anything to do with dad. He my brother really does live. He's very much like Esau. He does his own thing, his own life. Like no one can tell him anything. Like, yeah, he just lives his own life and he doesn't care, because he's been raised with that mindset that he is special and that he doesn't have to answer to anyone. So the impact of that negative mindset, that sexism, created Ronald to be a bit like Esau, where he just doesn't listen to anything. He just does what he wants. And the one that, I'm going to use this terminology, that's because it's what we're talking about, but it's not what I'm saying. But the one that was despised, me, is the one that, like my granddad said, is the one that has helped and rescued and borne the family up. And it was so interesting because dad actually, said that to me, like maybe at some point last year when we were talking. And, he didn't admit to obviously preferring my brother and all that stuff, but mum told me. And he was like, I just really want to thank you. And I think that was his way of, like you said, Leon, I think it was his way of recognizing that the grief, the pain, everything he's gone through helped him realize how wrong his viewpoint was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The culture is very, very strong that way, especially the African culture, in boys being better than girls.
Absolutely, Steve. And you don't recognize, but you can, like Emma was saying, you hold on and you carry these things. Like I definitely felt like my brother was, was preferred over me. But in my own journey, and obviously this movement and this message, over the last year, it's definitely as wobbly as maybe my walk has been. I definitely have grown in my confidence that though I was born a girl, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean I'm any less or anything. And I think, as Deb,
Amen.
as they've seen God work through me, I think it has empowered me and also brought them to know this God who does empower women and empower girls, because they grew up all of the mindset that, God, without saying it, but, God prefers boys.
It's amazing you say that. It's really strange. And look how long it took for your dad to see that as well, or admit it at least, that you're the one that was, that actually helped in the end, and how it failed his whole.
Absolutely.
But I spoke to my mum a couple of days ago because of the murder of this woman, and she was in the conversation. I wasn't speaking about that, but she was I've never heard her get so riled up about something. She really spoke strongly about this whole murder of this woman and how sexist society is and how bad men are and how they treat women so badly and how women go out fearing for their lives. And men, what shocked her the most is most of the men in the news on the reports of it didn't realize that's how women feel. She said, but this is the way of women for the last hundreds of years, that they have to go out with keys in their hands to defend themselves, and they're scared when they walk in the dark. And she said, the men have no concept. That's how we felt. I've never heard my mum speak like that. And then she was just telling me about the past, and she never said this before either. She said when she was growing up, her mum, that was my nana, used to say things like, well, of course they're successful, they're a man, or they've got money, of course, because they're a man. And so she grew up believing that. She had two brothers, that men were the successful ones, men could get the job opportunities, men were better, men were stronger, men were the ones that could run the government, women couldn't do that. And I never knew that about my nana. And I just thought, this is the first time she's ever said this. And then she said it probably had an impact on her, even though my mum, she went out and got a degree. Once she got married, when we were older, she got a degree, she's got a job and everything. But so she said it must have affected her. And even today, she still has a bit of doubt, like, can a woman really run the country? She said, but I'm trying to change all that. I'm trying to see that, equality. And she said, it's been in the news a lot, equality. So we had this massive discussion for about an hour, which is totally unlike my mum. And I just thought, wow, look at that. That must have impacted me as well. And it must have impacted the way she raised us, because we're two girls and two boys. And I think absolutely what you're saying is probably came through a little bit, even though they were very encouraging. I could never say that I picked up anything that they favored. Well, actually, no, maybe I could, but yeah. But it was an eye-opener for me. And I just thought, so when you said it's an African thing about favoring the man, and the funny thing was my nana was a very strong Methodist. She's a Methodist culture. And I thought, and yet as a Christian Protestant, she had that viewpoint that men, there's the headship model, total headship model. So white people have that viewpoint as well, not just Africans, because CG had just said Africans have this thing that
yes, you're right.
I think it's everywhere because of headship Christianity in Protestantism, which is, and British culture as well. Inheritance, so
but it's still very prevalent in the African culture, even though white people have moved on.
Yes,
much more.
It's much more patriarchal, perhaps still, obviously today. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But praise God, because I think that's what it's doing for a lot of women all over, making them be aware. It's like, the guy who died last year, the black guy, making people aware of racism. That's the same kind of impact.
Yes, it's true. It's really opening people's eyes. It's gone all over the place.
So yeah, I hear you, Sophie. When it comes to this kind of favoritism, it does run in a lot of people's minds. In my experience, having a boy child was kind of like something to be desired, like a boy first, or I'd rather two boys and one girl. Or something about the boy child. What I've seen in my experience that women kind of celebrate more.
But doesn't that go back to biblical history in the sense that everybody wants to give birth to the Messiah? So this is it's just rooted in the Bible, and so they just want the boy. They want that Messiah, and I think that's been handed down to us. So we're in the wrong dispensation if we still want a boy now, because the Messiah has come, and we don't need to have that mindset anymore. We've not moved on.
And I think it's what society makes a distinguish between men and female. So men have these roles, but it's like it's exalted over the women's roles, and the women are seen as weak, vulnerable, easy to, like, was it you that your mom was afraid? Like women are afraid in certain places to be around because of what men can do.
Yeah.
And it's like people have this mindset where I feel to have a daughter because I'm scared that she may sleep around, she'll have all these men, or she'll get raped, she'll be attacked. But I know if I have a boy, he won't go through that experience, even though he may sleep around. Let's celebrate that.
That's
He's a
okay.
man. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, they do celebrate
daughter-
the man
no.
sleeping around.
I don't want my daughter sleeping around, but
I'll be ashamed. She
comfortable.
might get pregnant.
Yeah, I'm ashamed, but I'm comfortable if my son's doing all that. That's, you know, it's acceptable in society where a boy would want a woman who slept around. But that's how we see things. It's warped and distorted. So a man is more praised over a woman. That's in where I come from, in my experience.
And they said that's reflected in the way they deal with these crimes, because this has opened up a whole box of people stepping out now and saying that they've been abused. All these women are speaking out now. And then they're looking at statistics of rape sentences and things. You know, when a man gets accused of sexual offence or rape, they're not punished in the way that they should be. This is what my mum was saying as well. She was picking up the fact that they get put inside for a year or something when it's just a hideous crime. And yet they're let off. So many times they've been let off in the past. People have just brushed it aside and said, oh, well, that's just kind of like a man sowing his oats or being typical of a man, or, you know, all those kind of excuses. Because the whole, probably this legal system is male dominated. It's just opening people's eyes to the way we view it. Like you say, it's just a warped picture. And this is why, going back to this, it's important that, you know, it says that Rebecca, without reflection, made that choice to push, you know, and if we have more reflection on our past and understanding where we come from and why people are perpetuating these wrong thoughts and feelings, Jacob perhaps would have been able to see more of his deception. And, you know, if he'd really done some more honest reflection, and if she had as well, she'd see, you know what, God doesn't work this way. Let's not do it this way. You know, if we really knew who God was, we wouldn't work.
Amen.
It shares some reflection of the past, because they waited 20 years to give birth to these twins.
They waited on the Lord for that.
They
never
prayed.
murmured.
They waited.
They didn't go with Hagar. They didn't do what Abraham had done. So they learned from that mistake.
And this is something what they wanted, this line.
Yeah.
This birthright, this line they waited. They had to wait 20 years. And they had that experience. But it's like maybe they waited longer in this experience, because Isaac's 100 years old. So they've been waiting all these years. Is it till 77?
Yeah. Jacob is 77. He still hasn't got the birthright. So you can imagine.
So maybe she thought maybe it's too long.
This is a test of faith. Like 20 years with Abraham and Sarah, God's promised them a child, and now she's past childbearing.
25 years later.
25. Yeah. But when she pushes for Hagar, I think it's been a long time, and you think she's past it. So she says, "Okay, let's go with Hagar." And it's always like we're tested by time.
We're tested by reality, because reality is telling me this seems impossible.
Yeah, humanly impossible.
So it's reality versus faith. What faith can do, it may say different to what reality is telling you, and we experience reality. That's the thing. We're living in reality. Reality is telling me that's blue, that's green, and faith is telling me that can change, but I'm not experiencing that. I can't see that change with my eyes, and it's kind of a test to know that God can bypass reality. If God tells you He's going to bypass something, that means whatever that is, He can override the reality of things, how it may seem to us, or how we may perceive things, you know. And it's just knowing that God's thoughts are hiding our thoughts, and His ways are hiding our ways. So our ways, maybe reality is telling me this, so I need to do this, because it may seem a bit logical. But if God said this, that means this is God's way. God will work things out in His own way, in His own time.
So with Jacob and Rebecca, it looked impossible that he would get this birthright, because Isaac is just set in his ways.
Because we've seen it. It was playing out right in front of them that this is going straight to Esau.
Yeah.
She's seen it.
In spite of marrying the women, that she knows Isaac's upset about that as well, but he's still not changing.
So the reality told her, she's seen it, it's happening.
Yeah.
But God told her, it's for Jacob. So what do you do with that?
And I think with us, it's the same. We look at this whole conflict that's going on in the world now, and these massive issues about sexism and racism. And here we are, this little group saying, yeah, we are accepting equality over here. And it's like, what can we do about it? How are we going to have any difference in the world when people in the world are ahead of us? Or, you know, what's the Sunday law test going to look like? How are we going to have any kind of influence or impact on people, except one person at a time, when we're supposed to be being trained up to do this great work still in our minds, I think.
But we're not known.
And we're not known. We're not, you know, there's so few of us, you know, all these things that Satan could be saying to us that, you know, we've not even accepted equality properly. We don't even see the depths of it. We've all got damage. It's like, how is he going to do this work with this group of people? It looks impossible. And it's all about just trusting him and doing it one on one.
Love.
Love, yeah. And changing one at a time.
And you know, that's the power of faith, and that's the power of God, is we serve a living and mighty God who created everything we see and all around us in 7 days, like, you know, the skies, the seas, the birds, the animals. And I think it's that process of also doing the work within us, because you see that even with Jacob, with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebecca, you see that all of them had this inner work that needed to be fixed. And I think a lot of us, it's as we're learning in the movement as well, and as we definitely learned over this year, is God's patience is also for our benefit. This long tarrying time isn't just a case of, you know, God's just making us wait that much longer. It's because there's still so much pain and hurt and unresolved issues deep within us, and God is bringing them all out to the surface
Amen.
so that it can heal us before we go forth. And I definitely have seen it in my own life.
Dear Father, we thank you for this time of study that we have had. We thank you for this story in the Bible. We thank you for the lives of the patriarchs and prophets, which teach us so much about ourselves, even today. We can see the influence of the generations of the fathers, of the grandparents, and that it's had on Jacob in his life. And we know that each of us have been impacted by our relatives and by our upbringing and by the thoughts and feelings that we've processed over many years. I pray that you would help us, Lord, to see things as you see them, to view the world as you view it, to have the love that you have for each individual soul, and to value each person as you value them. Help us, Lord, as we seek to be healed ourselves, that you would still use us to be a blessing to others. Be in a special way with each of us as we go about our daily tasks today. And may you bless us and be with us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.